Welcome back. You are chatting with John P. Today we are going to be talking about the perfect Rolex watch. Yes, that's right, the perfect Rolex watch, at least in my opinion. If you've been following me, not only on my Instagram, The Real John P., but also here on my YouTube channel, of course, which is where you are likely watching this, you'll know that on my wrist, most of the time, I'm wearing the Rolex Oyster Perpetual 39 Red Grape. This is something that I've had on my wrist for a few years now, and I just cannot seem to take it off. I have other watches, and of course, I also have Del Rey Watch, delreywatch.com, where we buy, sell, and trade watches that are more interesting than a simple watch like this. A nice watch, but a simple watch. And regardless, I always find myself gravitating towards this particular watch. So I'm going to be sharing with you my thoughts and opinions on this, as well as showing you more of an up-close view of the watch so that you can make up your mind if you are deciding to perhaps purchase one of these now discontinued watches. And of course, guys, please do not forget to check out, of course, delreywatch.com, where we buy, sell, and trade watches. So the Rolex Oyster Perpetual 39, the backstory on this particular watch, if you've missed kind of the snippets that I've thrown out there in the channel in the past, essentially after so much time being in business at Del Rey Watch with my business partner Federico Talks Watches, his YouTube channel, we decided to get watches for each other as a gift to kind of commemorate a certain milestone. And so we were kind of thinking, we had a couple of watches that we were deciding between, something from Cartier, something, some of the other brands. It's hard to kind of remember now, but we decided a watch that we would honestly never sell and would be relevant when we purchased it, as well as in the future, and something that, in my opinion, needed to be kind of boring. Right now, of course, we're thinking about this like this has the red grape, the purple dial. That doesn't seem that boring, but the reality is this particular version of the watch with this dial, when it came out in 2015, this model, the 39, was produced between 2015 and 2020, where it was then discontinued in this size, as well as the colors for it, at least particularly this one, as well as the other grape, the yellow grape. But the reality is, no one really purchased this watch. The color at the time, that kind of sunburst purple, was something that, maybe your typical watch guy or watch collector wasn't really attracted to at the time. So there were not a lot of these being purchased. There were not a lot of these floating around. So a few years ago, when we got these watches to commemorate the milestone, I just thought that was interesting, right? It was a watch that you wouldn't see anywhere. Also, it's a more entry-level watch. It's still a Rolex, but at the end of the day, it's much more junior from their offerings. The Oyster Perpetual line has been their more approachable line, lacking some of the features and obviously lacking a lot of the sports, if not most of the sport functionality that you would find in some of their hotter watches like the Submariner, like the Daytona. It's a very simple, time-only, lacking a date watch. So it is their more affordable or entry-level watch. And I'm going to talk about it at the end of this video, the one thing that I think holds people back from buying this watch, and why I think otherwise, without this one thing that some might consider to be a negative, it would be an otherwise perfect watch. So that's kind of why I have it. The reality is, in the watch market today, prices have really gone up. So while I think this was probably purchased for under $5,000 US, unworn, with the retail being just north of $5,000 at the time, now depending on where you go, where you look, this could be north of $10,000 US at the launch of this video, at least, depending on condition, box, and paper. So kind of unbelievable. I find myself still wearing it, but at a certain point, the pricing keeps climbing higher and higher. And this is truly a watch that I like to bang around and knock on things and truly wear everywhere and do everything kind of a watch. I'll wear this watch to go to the beach. I'll wear this watch out to get coffee. I'll wear this watch with blazers. I'll wear this watch with t-shirts, much like I'm here. We're in South Florida, so it's much more of a casual lifestyle for the most part in terms of needing to dress up and things like that. Also, I don't have to wear, business casual type attire. I'm a watch dealer. I have to tell where I watch, and I have a fairly flexible life in terms of the attire. So it really fits me. But looking at this watch, what I'm drawn to is, first, it's so simple, right? For me personally, having something so simple, so refined, yet so appealing is not that common. There is something to be said about taking something, removing all the excess, and having it be just what it is. And I think when we look at the Rolex Oyster Perpetual, particularly with the 39 size and the versions of it with the subtle accents at the hour markers, I think Rolex just did a fantastic job with the contrasting colors, not only on this one, but also the rhodium dial with the blue accents. I think they did a phenomenal job with that. And of course, talking about simplicity, the bracelets on these watches are just simple, right? It's an oyster bracelet. There's nothing to be said about this bracelet, in my opinion, that Rolex could really improve, with the exception of the clasp, which I'll talk about in a second. But when you put this watch on your wrist, at least on my wrist, it just feels so smooth and buttery. And that's going to be the iterative changes and improvements that Rolex has made to this particular oyster bracelet over the course of nearly a century at this point. So it's not that Rolex has reinvented the oyster bracelet over and over like some brands do with their bracelets or their strap offerings or even their entire catalogs of watches. Rolex has improved the oyster bracelet over time. And to get into an oyster bracelet, in my opinion, from Rolex at this, now a little bit higher of a price point, but where the retail price was originally, I think is pretty great, considering all the decades of changes and improvements they've made to the bracelet without taking away from not only the functionality of the bracelet, but also the design. And something also to note on the watch is that the 39 millimeter size that's now discontinued is unfortunately discontinued, seems to fit just everyone, right? I have about a 6/6.2 inch wrist, maybe 6.3 on a warm day at this point, and the watch fits perfectly. I couldn't imagine a better fitting watch. But also Federico, who had close to an 8-inch wrist at one time, the watch fit perfectly for him as well. And so now when you look at the Rolex offerings with the Oyster Perpetual line, you have the 36 and you have the 41, now the 41 being the larger size, more in line with that Datejust 41. There's really this gap between the watches being offered, not only in this line, but also, the Datejust line as well, where I feel like, they kind of force you to take sides, right? You either want that bigger one or you want the smaller one. But if you want something in between, or you have one of those in-between wrist sizes, it can be a little bit difficult coming from Rolex. So I think the 39 millimeter size, many people still want this. It's discontinued, and that's why we do see kind of the prices climbing a little bit higher than some of the other Oyster Perpetuals without the hot dials that you see today with the flatter colors, such as, of course, the Tiffany dial blue, as well as the yellows and the coral. The 39 size, people just love it. I love it. That's very appealing to me. But the one thing I will say about this watch that otherwise I would consider pretty much perfect is the clasp. Now, I personally like the clasp a lot. I think it's simple. I think it clicks very well. I've had no issues with it coming off. But there are going to be some people out there that say, the clasp doesn't have a flip lock and it doesn't have an easy adjustment, right? If you want to adjust the clasp, you have to use a screwdriver or a strap change tool or something similar and pop out the spring bar in the clasp and move the spring bar to one of the few notches, not even holes, but one of the few notches on the interior side wall of the clasp, which doesn't give you a lot of variance in terms of the movement on that. And it's also takes a couple of extra steps, which for some, in today's kind of a world where, you have these micro adjuster clasps, that could be a little bit of a downside for some. And if you had to nitpick it, and a lot of people do when we're talking about watches, that would be the one criticism, as well as it looks like kind of it has a flip lock clasp because the edge of the clasp kind of has that groove or indent. So it kind of throws people for a loop, but that's really the only negative thing that I could say about this watch. Now, the watch has a 48-hour power reserve. rating. In my opinion, it seems to be a little bit higher. Actually, setting it down for sometimes, 2 days and be able to put it on my wrist and have it keeping time, I think is more than sufficient. It's not as high as it could be out there, but that's not really what this watch is per se, right? This is a watch that you truly can wear anywhere, do anything with it, have it be relevant into the future, and still have a solid watch on your wrist that's simple, workhorse, and going to do its job in keeping proper time. Now, the aesthetics, everything else about it, the dial on top of the things I just mentioned is really the cherry on top, in my opinion. I love the watch. I put everything else on my wrist. I cannot seem to take the Rolex Oyster Perpetual 39 in red grape off my wrist. I'm looking forward to the future because so many other brands are coming out with cool things, and I want to see if a brand can come up with a watch that will force me to put it on my wrist as my new daily wear. What do you guys think? Rolex Oyster Perpetual 39. I would love to hear your opinions. I know so many people are going to say they are upset that they discontinued the 39mm size. It's such a popular offering today, but with the way the Rolex market is going, I can understand if maybe someone didn't want to put it in their collection. But what is your daily wear? I would also love to see it and hear it in the comments below. Guys, please do not forget to thumbs up, like, and subscribe. I appreciate it. You can find me on Instagram, TheRealJohnP, as well as DelReyWatch.com. Thanks, guys. You've been chatting with John P.